All right. So starting off with introductions, you can see on my Zoom screen here, it says Editorial Board Services, but I'm Dina Emerson. I am the Editorial Board Experience Manager on the Editorial Board Services team. And I'm part of a team that has anything and everything that has to do with editorial boards at PLOS, ranging from our more smaller community journal editorial boards up to the very largest one that we have, which is PLOS One, which it has about 9,500 academic editors at this moment in time. So we're a busy group, and we're really excited to welcome you here. And I'm going to pass it off to Julia to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I know your names so well by now. I'm Julia Robinson. I'm the executive editor of PLOS Global Public Health. I have been with PLOS for about a year now, and I kind of steer the ship with a big team, but that's my job, is to steer this big ship. I'm located in Seattle, so on the west coast of the US as well. And I've been in the field of global health for about 15 years now, and I'm just so excited about all of the energy and excitement around this project. So thank you all. And I think we've got Catherine. Catherine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi Julia, hi everyone. Nice to finally meet all of you, having met you by email and on Twitter. So my name is Catherine Chopchunji, and I'm one of 2 editors-in-chief. I'm usually based in Nairobi. I lead the African Population and Health Research Center that is headquartered in Nairobi. I also direct a PhD training program called the Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa. But now I'm on the East Coast of the US, and I'm joining in from Maryland, and happy to meet all of you.
Perfect. And for our editorial board members, welcome today. I have a little poll for you.
We have Madhu here.
Oh, is Madhu here as well? Okay, great.
Oh, hi. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I struggled to get the meeting ID. My name is Madhu Pai. I'm one of the 2 editors-in-chiefs, along with Catherine. Really happy to see some of you, having invited you, I've met you in other forums. Names. I did all my medical training and public health training in India, and subsequent training in epidemiology in California. And now I'm a professor of global health at McGill University in Montreal, which is in India. And it's a real pleasure to be associated with this new journal.
Perfect. You were breaking up a little bit, but I think we caught most of it there. If you want to type into the chat also, if you had some words, maybe that can help clarify exactly what you said. So now we'll go into the poll for our editorial board members. I'm going to relaunch it here. So, perfect. So if you can just answer these brief get to know you questions, leave it open for about 30 seconds here as everyone fills that out. All right, let's go ahead and close this out. Share results. Here's what we've got. Yeah, so the first question here of how many years have you served as an active researcher? We're trying to get a sense of how far along people are in their careers. And it looks like we have some pretty experienced people on the board here, and a lot of first-time editorial board members, or at least current editorial board membership here just at PLOS Global Public Health. And, you know, it's funny, I threw Antarctica in here. You never know where people might be calling in from these days, but it looks like we have a pretty even spread across the globe. It's really wonderful to see. And thank you for calling in from all of these different time zones. I believe it's about 1 a.m. in Australia right now, so not surprising that there's no one there. All right, so I'm going to now pass it over to Julia, who's going to give an introduction to PLOS Global Public Health.
Great. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And I am actually going to be handing this part over. Sorry about this part. Okay. I'm actually going to pass the microphone right now over to Catherine and to Madhu, who are going to give a little bit about the vision and the mission of the journal. And then I can come in with a brief word about our funding model, which is pretty special and unique for this title. So Catherine or Madhu, would you like to take the microphone?
I'll ask Madhu to go first.
I wonder if Madhu's having any kind of connection issues. I can maybe start out by showing this. This screenshot right here is our, it's one of our launch editorial pieces. And it really goes in. I hope that you've all had a chance to see this by now. It was written by the three of us to kind of lay out what our vision and the mission of the journal is. And I think what is underlying the mission in every step of the process is our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion in all aspects of the journal. So we're thinking about building this journal from the ground up with these ideas in mind, thinking about the composition of our board, thinking about the composition of our editors-in-chief, and making sure that they're truly representative of some of the most urgent priorities of the field. So that's something that you're going to hear from us a lot. We kind of sound like a broken record, I think, when we start talking about some of these principles by which we are, in every decision that we're making about the journal and its publications, is going to come back to these principles. So in this editorial piece, I'll pause and see. I don't know if Catherine or Madhu, if either of you would like to take over now, or if I should continue.
Hi, Julia.
Yep.
Yes, Madhu seems to have dropped off, but I think I can take over from now.
Great.
And yes, and this is a nice, I don't know what it is, it's a cartoon, it's a graphic that really sort of sets the stage of the context in which this journal has been launched. You know, the fact that we live in a world that is unequal in many respects. And there've been several, I think 2020 was sort of, I don't know whether it's a watershed moment, but I think it's a moment in which a lot of different movements and different thoughts sort of collided. And so I think the journal came at a time when all these debates have been happening around the Black Lives Matter movement, the Women in Global Health movement, but also the ongoing cause to decolonize global health. And so in a way, 2020 was, the pandemic has sort of maybe brought to the fore of what has been known for the global health practitioners for quite some time. But then somehow all these movements have sort of come together to create an environment where there's more space, I think, to have uncomfortable but important conversations about the asymmetries of power and privilege that permeate all aspects of global health. And in a way, personally, I would say like the Black Lives Matter movement, I think, is what like unlocked this whole maybe courage and boldness to start having these conversations. But I think what we are trying to, the context in which this journal is being launched is the lack of diversity in global health generally. So the lack of diversity in journals is sort of a symptom of a bigger, systemic problem that permeates global health practice, generally speaking. So the knowledge part of global health is a manifestation of the unequal powers and asymmetries and privilege that happen in global health, generally speaking. And so in particular, we know that there's a lack of diversity at all levels in journals, but researchers and academics and global health practitioners from different parts of the world have other concerns. Some of them lack of affordability to publish in journals, but also lack of access to what is published. And then some kinds of practices that sort of lock out knowledge from different parts of the world. Issues around what is important, what's not important, who decides what's important or not. So all these have, I think, which have sort of been happening, in the global health field. And so this is the context in which this journal is being launched. Next slide, please, Julia. Yes, so you know, we are having a webinar a few weeks back about the PLOS Global Public Health Journal and what it's trying to do. And it's a question of whether we are being bold enough, whether we're being bold at all. And I'm a glass half full kind of person. I think we're being bold. It's a big thing that we're trying to tackle. And perhaps it's one of those things, you know, the elephant is in the previous slide. An elephant is a big thing. So sometimes you have to ask yourself whether you should tackle the whole elephant, whether you should tackle the piece of the elephant that you have access to. And so in a way, the mission of PLOS Global Public Health is to try and attempt to address these deeply entrenched inequities in global health and try to make impactful research visible and accessible to, you know, different types of global health practitioners, whether they are health professionals, policymakers, communities, you know, whichever way you describe them. But the global health practice is full of professionals from different fields. And many times, interesting, even when you think about the global health knowledge, it is dominated by one type of global health practitioners, which is mostly the academics and researchers. But we want to see how do you make impactful research visible and accessible to different types. And as Julia said, equity, diversity, and inclusion at the core of the journal's mission. And so we're trying to be deliberate. And one of the reasons we're having this discussion with academic editors is that even in your work, that it's something that you have to have at the back of your mind. Equity, diversity, and inclusion in the for instance, the reviewers that you select, but also in listening to those voices that are not always heard when it comes to who gets published and whose voice and I mean whose knowledge gets put out there in the knowledge system that exists. And so we're very deliberate in trying to recruit a diverse pool of experts from all geographies. It wasn't straightforward and easy, and I don't think we've got it perfectly right, but we've tried. And we're trying to make an intentional effort to ensure that there's representation from historically underrepresented and excluded groups. So when we started posting some of the editorial board members, people were saying, hey, they are all from different parts, they're still from high income countries, but we look at diversity from different perspectives. So we have maybe more women, maybe we have more people from you know, minority groups, we have people from maybe underrepresented geographies. So it's not just a geographical thing. We really tried to, you know, have a diverse group of people on the editorial board. And we'll try to amplify the work of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, especially those from the Global South, as well as individuals, you know, whose lives are impacted, working and living within the impacted communities. So that is something we are aiming to do. As I've said, the global health knowledge is dominated by experts that are usually academics or researchers. So we want to see how do we expand this so that even the communities where the researchers work or the communities where the public health, global health experts work, that their voices can be heard as well. And that will be the next frontier. Once we've sort of set up the journal and it's up and running and, you know, it's like in the normal mode of academic publication, we'd like to see how to amplify the voices of other practitioners and other members of the global health community. Next slide. Yes, so these are things which are in the blog, that the link that Julia shared. I hope you've all had time to read it, but we are making some kind of commitments, avoiding elitism, so that as part of the PLOS ethos, generally speaking, not focus on novelty, quote unquote, about what is novel and what is not, and not to focus on metrics like impact factors, but rather on the rigor of the research and its contribution to the base of academic knowledge. Because that's part of the reason why some voices get excluded, because there's a determination of what is novel and what is not. And what we're saying, as long as the research is rigorous, it has been done in a way that is sound, and the methodology is good and it's ethical, then it will be published. Then other than that, accessibility with regards to you know, having open access to all content, including manuscripts and data. And then making sure that article processing charges and fees are not a barrier to publication. And there are lots of details about how this is going to happen. Lots of, there's something in it for everyone, more or less. And I think the pledge we've gotten from the PLOS leadership is that article processing charges will not be a barrier to anyone who wants to publish their work. So other than institutional mechanisms, individual mechanisms that are sort of customized to the geography, but also the institution where the person wants to publish is coming from, there will be other mechanisms that will be done on a case-by-case basis. But the key thing is that we don't want money to be a barrier to publication. And then there's also limitations of publishing only in English language. So trying to work towards language accessibility and global communication of research. So we are working on a journal development plan. And once, as I said, the whole system is set up, the editorial board has been set up, we've started receiving papers. So once all this has taken place, then we have a journal development plan. And one of those is to see how to make the articles more accessible in other languages. Yes, Ijoma has a question. I think your hand is up as well. So
Yes.
I'm happy to pause and see whether you have a question that I can respond to.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Catherine. And to everyone, hello from Detroit, Michigan, USA. And by way of Nigeria, my name is Ijoma Alpara. I'm so excited to be part of this amazing group. I have two quick, thoughts. I don't know if they're necessarily questions, but Catherine, one is, the bullet point number one, as we talk about rigor of the research, is just to lift up, what that might mean in terms of what is considered rigorous, right? Because many indigenous knowledge systems and knowledge production systems may not necessarily pass the muster of quote unquote rigor according to a more colonial model of what and definition of rigor. So I just want to lift that up for consideration. We may not necessarily tease that apart here, but I just want to lift that up, right? And then the second piece is just and you may already address this at some point, but when we talk about accessibility, it sounds like yes, we're referencing economic or financial accessibility, but also to lift up accessibility as it relates to disability. And I was curious, and I guess this is a question, which is what the arrangements are for ensuring that the work is accessible, in terms of our folks who are living with disability.
Okay, thanks so much. I think I've seen a comment. Those are really, really important questions from Dina that let's hold them for the Q&A. Very important points to think about. And I think the issue of accessibility, not just through language, but also, as you said, people with different types of disabilities in accessing, published work. I think those are really important points for consideration. But I think in the interest of time, we can sort of pause, keep the thought, and we revisit that, once we've gone through the main part of the presentation. Okay. Yes, Julia.
Yeah.
Next slide, please.
Oh, did we?
Yes.
Oh, we had this last one.
Okay. Yeah, this is the last one. And as Madhu has just posted a link to the blog in case you've not seen it, but really trying to strive towards being, all this stuff, more feminist, more anti-racist, anti-patriarchal, anti-ableist, and anti-elitist, and anti-classist in our work. It's a tall order, but it's one of those things we've given ourselves, and it's one of those things we think you'll hold us accountable as we go along. But at least the good intentions are there. So it's a question of how we're able to operationalize those good intentions. And trying to explicitly address and combat paraacute helicopter research, for most of you in the Global South, I think this is something which you're familiar with. And then publish research that addresses health inequities wherever they occur, and not just in low-income countries. Because that's one of the, I think, the way global health has sort of been distorted as being practiced on Global South by academics from the Global North, and not something that actually affects the whole globe. So really, those are some of the things, as I've said, we've set ourselves up to do. And we hope that with your support and commitment that we're able to live up to the ideals that we've set ourselves up for. So on that note, I think this is the end of the slide. Madhu is back. I know that you have something to add, and then perhaps Julia can continue with the rest of the presentation.
Sure. Madhu, I'm just going to go ahead. I noticed that we have a lot to cover still. I know we will have some open discussion time at the end, so I hope this is okay that I just keep going through. I'm just going to touch really briefly on this issue of article processing charges. Just to underline again, I won't get into the details of this model, but just know that there will never be a financial barrier to publishing in PLOS Global Public Health. If the research is rigorous and sound and makes a contribution to the base of academic knowledge, it will be published. We will find a way, either through, there's different mechanisms with this where we calculate institutional participation in the global equity model. There might be individual waivers based on where the researchers are located. But just know as an academic editor that we will publish all sound science in our journal that fits within our scope. And we have a very firm commitment to that, and we will not deviate from that. So we get that question a lot. How do we address this elephant in the room? As academics, as researchers, we are not supposed to dirty ourselves with the question of money, but the question of money is a huge barrier, especially in this field. And so we are committed to removing that barrier at every turn. So just know that if anybody wants any additional details about this model, please reach out to me at any time, and I am happy to discuss this further. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone back over to Dina, who is going to get back into kind of the nuts and bolts of what it is to be an academic editor. So Dina.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that really great introduction. And yeah, I've seen some chatter in the chat about getting these slides and the recording later on. We will absolutely be sending this out to every editorial board member, even those who could not make it today, both the slides and the recording and all of the links contained within. I do want to mention again, one housekeeping thing that I forgot to mention earlier, which is the question piece of things. As we're going through, just to keep us on pace here as we go through the resources, if you have questions, either hold on to them for the Q&A session, or you can add them to the chat and maybe we can answer them along. We do have a couple other staff members keeping an eye on the chat as well. So please just hold off on the questions until later. So launching into kind of further introductions, this one will be a little bit quick because you know the editorial board and you are a part of it. So just a pointing out of the resources that we'll cover in this presentation. They're all linked within, and I want to show you the visual of where you can find them online, because the reality is you probably will not remember everything that happens today. And what we really want to do is point you to where you can then access those things on demand. So here is where anything underlined in this presentation is a link. This links out to the list of editorial board members that you'll be able to see here. So right now, this is updated by us manually. As we grow the editorial board, we aim to set it up as a sync with Editorial Manager. That way it'll be updated in real time as people join the editorial board. So if you don't see your name on here just yet, know that it will come pretty soon. So that's that. And a brief distinction between section editors and academic editors. So the section editors are leaders of particular sections within the scope of PLOS Global Public Health and take on a higher responsibility and accountability on providing consultations on particular subject areas or tricky manuscripts, if you will. And then academic editors, which is the main audience, I would say, of this presentation, are the ones handling the peer review process. So you do have quite a bit of autonomy as an academic editor. You handle the facilitation of the peer review process from initial evaluation, deciding whether to send it out for peer review or not, all the way through rounds of revision, if applicable, through to a final decision for publication in PLOS Global Public Health. This academic editor role you will have seen already as part of your recruitment and onboarding process, as well as this next slide that we wanted to spend some time just dedicating to. Again, you will have seen this as part of the onboarding process, but ethics is something that is particularly important to PLOS across all of our journals. And we've just recently developed this very clear code of conduct for editorial board members that we expect everyone that's a part of our journal to uphold. All right, so getting into the meat of the infrastructure that you're going to be living in, we use Editorial Manager as our submission system. And we have this screenshot guide that's very helpful and navigable for anything that you might want to be doing in Editorial Manager. So again, just to give you a visual of what this looks like, all of these are links to various portions of this Editorial Manager guide. So very importantly, getting started, you start in here. Once you log in, making sure that your information is up to date. So at any time, let's say you change institutions or you would prefer to use a different email, you can go into Editorial Manager and click this Update My Information box, and that will take you to your personal profile within Editorial Manager. So email is the main mode of communication that we do. And so it's important to have that email up to date with your current and preferred contact information. Another really helpful thing for both you and the journal staff as well is to add in personal keywords. So these are free text keywords that represent your area of expertise. So as Julia and other PLOS staff are looking at incoming submissions and they would like to invite you to handle a manuscript, it's really helpful for us to be able to search by these keywords and compare the incoming manuscript with the expertise of various editorial board members, and using keywords is one of the ways that we can do that. So again, that's on that Update My Information page. Another really helpful tool on this, on your main academic editor profile, is setting unavailability dates. So again, a screenshot guide here, it's at the very bottom of your Editorial Manager profile. If you're going to be out of the office for any sort of prolonged period of time, or it's a particularly busy semester for you, you can add in these unavailability dates, and that will show up as a little flag when we're going to send out manuscript invitations that you are not available to handle any submissions. What is helpful is if you are currently handling a submission and maybe it's in between rounds of revision, if you left an extra note for us that says, I'm out of the office, I can't take any new manuscript submissions or invitations, but I can handle my current assignments through to a final decision. Any sort of clarifying messages is really helpful to us. So that's the intro to Editorial Manager at this point. And then going forward, just to step out a second and look at the overall life, if you will, of a manuscript that comes into PLOS Global Public Health. Just emphasizing that we do have some operational support for manuscripts as they come in, which takes the form of various technical checks along different stages of the manuscript life cycle. These are things like we're checking to make sure the authors have uploaded all of their metadata correctly, they've filled out the form appropriately, and that all of the pieces of the submission are there. The other point that I want to point out here is this submission scanning, or subscan for short, which is a step that our internal staff editors do to check that the submission is accurately aligned with the scope of the journal, and also a quick check for the publication criteria, as well as some ethical checks as well. So prior to invitations going out to you, each submission is evaluated by a staff member as well. And then the rest of this is all your purview here. So academic editor assignment, and then you can issue various decisions or move along through the peer review process. And eventually, if the manuscript is accepted for publication, it'll go through production and will be published online. All right, so again, getting into our resources that we have available for academic editors. The first stage on the life of a manuscript, as you'll encounter the manuscript, is an invitation to handle the manuscript. And so I'm even going to toggle out of this presentation here to the quick guide that we have. This is the wrong one, excuse me. To this quick guide that we have here for of deciding whether to accept or decline a manuscript invitation and how that manuscript invitation will come to you. So all things, as I mentioned before, come in through email. So this is roughly the anatomy of a manuscript invitation. You'll be able to see these because it'll say PLOS all in caps right in the subject line there. So you should be able to pick them out pretty easy. I know we all have very flooded inboxes these days. So that's a really quick way to spot these. It will have critical information about the manuscript itself, including the number, who wrote it, the title, and then at the bottom of the email, the abstract and keywords, so you can start to get a sense of that manuscript, as well as various other links of how you can decide what you would like to do with that manuscript, whether you would like to see the full submission or decide whether to accept or decline. So I'll let you explore that guide in more detail later on. But another really helpful thing in this guide is this table here that provides some guidance on what to consider before you decide to accept or decline a manuscript invitation. Key things to consider are time. Do you have enough time to handle this manuscript all the way through its rounds of revision? Do you have any conflicts of interest? So that's why we put the author list in the invitation so that you can take a look at the authors and think to yourself, okay, I mentored that student as a graduate student, I probably should not take on this manuscript. And of course, is it in your area of expertise? Do you have the research expertise in order to make decisions and invite suitable reviewers, et cetera, for this manuscript? And I'm going to pass it off to Julia just after this slide here. This is a helpful guide also that's at the top of that decision table when you're thinking about whether you want to take on a manuscript or not. There's key stages along the peer review timeline, and we have guides for each of those, but roughly each manuscript is different. But roughly this is the generalized timeline that a manuscript should process through the peer review process. So the initial evaluation is where you decide whether to send it out for peer review or not. And then if you do choose to send it out for peer review, roughly spending 2 weeks looking for and securing reviewers. And then the reviews take about 2 to 3 weeks to come in. And then once those reviews are in, you issue your first decision or final decision, depending on the reviews. And then it'll repeat until it goes through to a final decision. And Julia is going to go through the content and some guidance at each of those key steps in the peer review timeline.
I was on mute. There we go. Okay. Oops, I'm sorry. This is not the right one. Or it is the right one. It's just not at the right spot. Let me just catch up with ourselves. Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the editorial decisions that you might make as academic editor of a manuscript. So when you first accept an invitation, you're going to be able to assess the manuscript to see whether or not, basically at this step, we're looking at whether or not it is suitable to go out for peer review. So you'll be doing this initial evaluation, looking at our publication criteria, and also assessing it with your own subject area expertise. So some of the common questions we get about our publication criteria, I think the number one question is around novelty. This is something that I think people can struggle with. How do we know whether or not this paper is suitable to go out for peer review? Does it make does it make a contribution to the base of academic knowledge? So this is something that is really a judgment call on your part, in addition to kind of thinking about what the definition of the base of academic knowledge is. Different people have different ideas about how much of an impact, quote unquote, a study's finding should have to think about whether or not it's making a contribution. I like to think of this element as being, will this research matter to a community? And the community might be large, the community might be small, but will this research make a difference to a community? And if the answer is yes to that question, then the paper should go on for peer review, provided that it is ethically and methodologically sound. So that's one of our major kind of wrestling points, I would say, with academic editors, is really trying to come to terms with what we mean by, does it make a contribution to the base of academic knowledge? So we definitely don't reject on the basis of novelty. Another thing that we get quite often from academic editors is the question of whether or not the language is suitable for peer review. So this is something that I think we can go back to Dina's slide about kind of that life cycle of the manuscript. It's important to know that before any manuscripts reach your inbox, they have been assessed by a PLOS editor. So PLOS editors do often reject papers before sending out invitations to academic editors because the language makes it too difficult to assess whether or not the research is scientifically sound. So just rest assured that if it's reached your inbox, someone has determined that this paper is at least, you can understand it to an extent to which you should be able to assess its scientific merit. Now, we also add different kinds of notes to manuscripts before they reach you. So with this language issue, often we will write a note in there to say at revision time, this paper might need some extensive copy editing. And this is often something that reviewers and academic editors also note on too. So thinking about our overall mission of inclusion and making sure that we're representing research from all around the world, I think that this issue of language is something that we really need to take really thoughtfully, and really before rejecting a paper because it's because of language or grammar issues, really think about, will this paper, is it able to be copy edited to an extent that the scientific merit of this paper will be known? Again, this is kind of this is something that people have different levels of comfort with. People like to discuss this. So if you ever would like to discuss any particular manuscript, you can always feel free to reach out to me. And I'd be happy to kind of go through it with you, or kind of wrestle that concept with you a little bit further if you'd like. Let's see, what else? You might also find other notes from our staff editors about different elements of the research methodology. So we offer some resources to assess either clinical trials or qualitative studies, that kind of thing. You'll find those all in the notes that you will receive when you accept the invitation for a manuscript. Again, you know, we're looking to you as experts in the field to assess whether or not this manuscript is fit for peer review. Our publication criteria are pretty broad, and this field is particularly broad and multidisciplinary as well. So, you know, think about when you're assessing whether or not to send this out, you think about the topic and the subject matter, obviously, the methodology, all of these things will fit into kind of who you will also invite for a review or for a paper. So at this point, the only decision that's possible at this point, well, we have a decision whether or not you want to reject before review, or you can send it out for peer review at this point. So we're going to just toggle out of this again and go to, let me see. There we go. So this is our resource guide for the initial evaluation stage. So you see, you'll have your timeline again here. We have some resources for you that are available about some of these criteria. We have a link to our publication criteria with further explanation and the journal scope as well. Here is kind of some tips, I guess, for about when to reject without review. So if a paper is really fundamentally not able to be revised, you know, if the methodology is fatally flawed, or if the researchers would have to conduct the experiments again or the study again to be able to have this paper be fit for review, then we could reject that without review. One option that is available at this point is if you think this paper is not methodologically sound, but it shows potential, you could do what's kind of a softer reject letter, which is like, here's some constructive feedback for how to make this study better. If you are able to make these revisions either to the paper, or if you do reconduct the study with these methodological changes, you know, we think it's an important topic, so we would encourage you to resubmit. If that's the case, often we will try to track these papers. So if they do come back in, we might assign you as an academic editor again to the same paper, so you could continue on with that process of assessing the research. Okay, let me see if there's anything. That's the end of this. Okay, we'll go back over here. Okay. So finding reviewers. This is something that academic editors sometimes find challenging. Basically we have three major pools that we would encourage academic editors to go to when thinking about who to invite as a reviewer. One is your own network of colleagues. We find that, you know, these are the folks that are probably going to be most likely to respond positively to your request because they know you have confidence in their ability to assess a manuscript and its methodology. We do want to make sure that all these suitable reviewers have the expertise in the subject matter. They should be actively publishing, and we should try to make sure that they are unbiased without any kinds of conflicts of interest. The second kind of pool of reviewers that we would encourage people to reach out to would be researchers whose work you know. So this could be you know, a similar research group from a different institution, perhaps, that you know is actively publishing in the same topic area that you have expertise in. So that's another really useful way. Potentially there's extended networks that might also recognize you and want to review your paper as well. Our third pool is kind of out in the universe. So we use different resources like PubMed, Google Scholar, Web of Science. There's all kinds of different places, and we have a resource guide for you. If you've exhausted those first two pools and you're really kind of struggling to find suitable reviewers for this paper, we would recommend that as kind of the third tier.
Hey, Julia,
Mhm.
we can only see the presentation.
The present, that's,
Yeah,
oh,
did you want to show the quick guide?
yes, I'm headed there. I'm headed there
Oh,
now.
I see, okay.
Thank you, though. Let's see here. Let me get out of this. So finding and securing reviewers. This is the resource guide that'll be linked out to in the materials from this presentation. Again, we have some reviewer invitation tips from editors and from kind of past experience, people who have found different kinds of strategies to find reviewers in tricky situations. You can find all of these resources here. We have our suitable reviewer here in all of their attributes. Let's see, here are some of the other tips that we have. You know, we would hope that, again, with that timeline, the default turnaround time for reviewers is about 10 days and no more than 21 days if possible. You can find these reviewers also in Editorial Manager. Be advised that when you use Editorial Manager and looking for or inviting reviewers, that database is completely uncurated. So there's been no assessment of the capacity or the expertise of any individual you might find in Editorial Manager. So we would want to make sure that you as an academic editor would definitely verify the expertise before inviting any reviewers to assess a paper. Let's see. There is a guide here that tells you a little bit more about how to actually use Editorial Manager to invite these reviewers. If you're ever having any trouble, you can always feel free to reach out to PLOS staff and we will try to help you navigate the system. And setting expectations. So we find that usually to be able to find 2 reviewers for a paper, and every accepted paper at PLOS Global Public Health must have at least 1 external reviewer, hopefully 2, but 1 is the minimum. And we find it on average, it takes about 6 to 8 invitations to secure those 2 reviewers. So that would be a good ballpark for your initial round of invites. If those invitations aren't successful, then you could either go back in, or Editorial Manager also has a way to kind of set up alternate reviewers. So the system will be able to go to those alternate reviewers if your initial list is exhausted. So that'll become more clear as you're navigating the Editorial Manager system. Again, if you have any questions about that, just let us know. I think that is about it for this slide. So now we're going to move on to assessing reviews and making decisions. So this is when I'm sure as researchers, you have had this experience, and as academic editors, you've had the experience of conflicting reviews coming back. They are going to come to you in a structured form. They'll be the direct words of the reviewers, and we have 4 available decisions at this point. Sometimes it can be hard to take these divergent opinions and be able to figure out what kind of decision you should make with it. You as the academic editor are kind of the person who is in charge of summarizing and guiding the author to what review information is important. So if you see a reviewer that has methodological advice that you think is really important, you can highlight that in your decision letter. If there's other feedback present that you think should be deprioritized at the revision phase, then you can point that out as well. So our 4 decisions, let me just toggle back out into this. Our 4 decisions that are possible at this point are summarized in this table right here. So we have major revision, minor revision, accept, and reject. And those are your 4 options that are available at any decision point. So one thing that I would like to point out at this point is that the difference between major revision and minor revision. In general, when you're issuing a minor revision, your assessment is that the manuscript is probably going to be suitable for publication. There's just minor revisions that are needed to kind of either clean up the manuscript, address the methodological, or add clarity to the methods or the conclusions. But usually at this phase, authors pretty much expect a minor revision to be on track to be published. Major revision, that expectation is not clear. If it's a major revision, if the manuscript might have potential to be published, but it's not guaranteed. If the authors don't address the substantive issues that you point out, then they will not be published. So that's a nuance that I'm sure most of you are already familiar with. There is some more guidance in this quick guide right here. One thing I would like to point out about an accept decision is that at accept, the authors do not have a chance to revise the manuscript anymore. So if you have some, even if they're very minor amounts of feedback that you have left that you would like the authors to revise before publication, please issue a minor revision decision with that feedback, even if it seems small, because at accept, they will not have the opportunity to go back and make any changes to the manuscript. Okay, and again, with the reject, you also have the opportunity at this phase to, if you do reject after peer review, you could also issue what we call an open reject, which is again that encouragement that this topic or this methodology or something about this paper is important. It's just not suitable for publication, but if they work on it more, then perhaps it could be. So you can always include those kind of softer rejects at this phase as well. Okay, I believe, so this is a little bit more about kind of what you'll see in an editorial manager about how these decision letters are done. You'll see kind of this weird little formatting here where it says, please insert comments here and delete this placeholder text. So that's where you can do that summary that we discussed before about in prioritization of reviewer feedback. You can enter in kind of your guidance to the authors in this place right here. Okay, let's see. So I believe that is most of what I had to share with you. I believe at this point I'm handing it back to Dina.
All right, perfect. So I did see a few questions in the chat come up about where to find these resources. So they are linked here. They're on the resources for editors page, which is a public facing website. And it looks like this. And it should have all of the links that you need in order to perform your academic editor role, including a link to the editorial manager system. This is the editorial manager guide we went through before, and then each of the different quick guides that we've just gone through here. Another helpful resource is this guide that we have to adjudicating decisions, which we have in both a PDF form and then a click-through form where you can kind of, do your tech troubleshooting, if you will, if you're experiencing particular issues in reviewer feedback and you need some both guidance on what to do next and even some sample decision letter text that you can have. So that's that there. And then I also saw a question about contacting the journal. So we've listed 2 email addresses here. This is our journal email address, and this is your one-stop shop for any sort of manuscript level help. So anything that you email in goes into a central kind of case management system in which different people within the organization can access that. So if you have a question, depending on what the nature of your question is, we can route that to the appropriate person to handle. And so that's a particularly helpful email address if you're asking a question about a specific manuscript. Certainly if you see any sort of ethical concerns on a manuscript, etc., just know that it will get to the appropriate staff member. And the second email here is my department's email address. And this is more if you have questions about your role more generally or your experience more generally. Maybe you're not receiving manuscript invitations and you would like a few more, or you would like to recommend someone to the editorial board. This is a very helpful email address. Anyway, that's where you can find the contact information for all of us. Now I'm going to open it up to the Q&A session. One thing I also want to reiterate is that it was in the chat before. If we don't get to your question during either in the chat or during this Q&A session, Zoom does download the chat, so we'll be able to follow up and answer all of those questions. I'm already seeing quite a few, so I think that we'll download those, answer them, and then attach a document, say, to the follow-up email. So that way all of those questions are addressed if we don't get to it at this moment in time. So just in the chat, ones that I wanted to call out that did come up before we open it up to the floor, there was a question about using the EM database as a reviewer finding tool and being able to search by keywords. We don't have that functionality available because the EM database is an unrestricted database, meaning anyone can create an account, and even you as an academic editor can create accounts on behalf of other people. So this results in this very large, expansive database, but an uncurated database. So some people are very good at filling out their keywords and some people are not. So say you went to go search by keyword, there may be the perfect reviewer in the database, but you won't be able to find them if they haven't added their keywords. And so this results in certain people who are very good at filling out their profiles being bombarded by invitations. So the EM database is really just there as a functional tool to invite reviewers to a manuscript and to see their stats on previous reviews. So we recommend using an external database to verify someone's expertise, finding their current contact information, and more often than not, they're going to be in the EM database already. So you can then invite them and interact with them through that database. The issue of reviewer search tools definitely does come up, and that integration with Editorial Manager, instead of having to do that awkward toggle out and then toggle back in. The company Aries, which provides Editorial Manager, is working on better integration with external third-party tools, so that way there will be a link right there in EM that you can seamlessly pull in, search and pull in reviewers. So for databases such as PLOS is a really well-known one. You'll be able to do that, but they're undergoing development right now, so it's currently not available, but hopefully coming soon. All right, with that, I'm going to open up the floor for questions. I'm even going to stop sharing my screen. If you want to raise your hand or add questions into the chat, we'll facilitate this question and answer. All right, I already see a hand here. Let's see, ask to unmute. Tamam.
Hello, thank you very much for having us today and for the explanation, because I've been an editor just before PLOS Global Public Health with PLOS Medicine, and it's not an easy navigation if you're not guided through it. So thank you very much for that. It's very useful to have the guides. I just want to mention a couple of things, and I really don't expect answers now because I don't want to eat everybody's time. But the first one is on the section. So I am with Aisha Kadir, the section editor for humanitarianism and global health, and it would be very useful if we are given an indication on how flexible the editors-in-chief are about sort of creating a framework or a direction or a choice of themes or so on for the sections. And that is obviously subjective, and it doesn't exclude any other submissions. It's not about that, but about trying to pursue people to publish in a certain direction that the co-section editors think is relevant for the time and their topic. The second one is following Ijioma's argument about the vigor and methodology, and it's always, it's easier to fall into the requirement of the methodological rigor as defined by most of the, high impact journals. And that is, with full appreciation for the great effort you're doing on the inclusion. There's the inclusion of different ways of doing and understanding things that do not fit neatly in the Western academy. And I don't know, can we, for example, accept the idea of disclosing non-compliance with the So if we have submissions or calls for submissions from practitioners or academics in different contexts or topics that are not founded yet in the academic literature as it is today, can we agree, for example, to say that outright, disclose that as part of it as we promote publication of things that wouldn't be published anywhere else? Because I think this is going to be needed. And if this is not the place to do it, then I struggle to think of anywhere else. The last point is we have like 90 people here and it's incredible. And can I suggest, for example, for us to have debates inside this group or whoever is available, that we can sit and chat in a friendly, considered manner about topics of importance, even if it doesn't lead anywhere to publication or anything. Just having this group of people willing to sit now, 90 people, and this discussion is incredible. And having the opportunity to talk about substance is going to be an unparalleled opportunity. Thank you very much.
Madhu, it looked like you might wanted to respond. Okay.
Yes. So Tamam, first of all, the section editors. So as of now, we have 20 sections with 2 editors each, 40. We are adding a new section right now on gender and health. We might add another one on migration and health. So it might grow. But that section editor group of 40, 50 editors, we will have a separate meeting, right? That is a more strategic group that is supposed to be doing guidance for the entire journal direction. There, we are hoping that you and Aisha, for example, will write a piece on where humanitarian work might look like in future, what sorts of things you would like to see, and that is how you give direction to that section. And the same thing will happen in all other sections, right? So yes, so that is pending. This call is a mix of section editors and academic editors. So we cannot discuss everything in this call, but we already have a doodle poll with you for the section editors meeting. The issue about type of papers, I absolutely agree. But for example, if somebody submits a randomized control trial, we must respect what a good quality randomized control trial is. There is no question about deviating from that because that's based on evidence-based practice. But then if you're inviting a practitioner to write about humanitarian experiences, we should not force fit that into a traditional EPI study design, which is why Julia, Catherine, and I have lots of discussions on liberating us from a traditional set of submissions to more practice papers, case studies, essays, perspectives, analysis, the kind of broad breadth that BMJ Global Health has, that Shay has opened up to all of us. Manuscripts that are not the traditional research type of papers. So I think between all of this, we could find a home for the kinds of ground perspectives that we are looking for.
Yes, and just to add to that, we also have, we're trying to build a really vibrant home with the Speaking of Medicine and Health blog. That's another area where we have a lot of flexibility and we can publish things with a very short turnaround time. So if there's ever any kind of response to current events, any kind of material that maybe would be something that we might want to fast track to get out quickly, that's also a home for that kind of material. And that's something that you can coordinate with me on, and Catherine and Madhu as well.
And also, Julia, to also go outside of the relatively smaller section editor group into the much bigger overall editorial board, how do we manage this large number? It's a bit of a struggle for me. We will have 200 plus editors overall. Could we create like a Slack channel where we can share notes and share practices, or some kind of a community of practice on discourse? Remember, you had already said discourse platform is open to us and we can create a community of practice. Whatever people are comfortable with, we can go with that platform. That's where we could have all sorts of debates that we're currently having on the chat box here. That is where I think we could take it. Or we could do like once in 2 months a webinar of this kind, like an open house. Whoever wants to drop in and raise the concerns that they have, they can use it to bounce it off. And then we also need a way to connect the academic editors with the section editors, right? So if you are dealing with a tricky paper on humanitarianism, you should be able to ping Aisha and Tamam and say, hey guys, can you just look over this and help me out with this? Do we, accept this paper or not, right? That I think would be a referral, a peer referral system that I think we should have. Catherine and I are always available as editors-in-chief, but honestly, we don't have the kind of depth that you folks have in your area. So I'm not sure we can necessarily solve all your technical problems. Administrative issues, Julia can solve along with the PLOS team.
Perfect, thanks. I see Ransom, you have your hand up here. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, thank you. I have a question. This is a great forum to like really share our experiences and perhaps answer some worries that we have. So my question is, what do we do when you have an article that has been under review for over a month or two, and of course, we've gotten a lot of reviewers that either refuse to turn in their reviews in time. And right now, you have just one review that has like successfully been completed. But this article has been there for like, a long time. If I'm an author, I'm going to be very worried because I really want my paper to like review quickly. So when can the AEs have the leverage to take decision, when you have just one review completed, after a long time?
Julia, do you mind taking that one from an editorial perspective?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we have that kind of general 10 to 21 days. 21 days is kind of a maximum amount of time. Within the editorial manager, you are able to invite additional reviewers. And I believe you should have the capacity, Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, to uninvite previous reviewers as well. So that can kind of change your list to just say, to the person who's not responding, never mind. Thank you anyway. We're going to move forward with somebody else or something like that. So you should have that capacity to be able to do that based on your judgment about how long it's taking. There are those automatic reminders that will go out that are sent by our system, but you are free to kind of change course if you'd like to before that 21 days is up.
And then following on that, what Julia did mention is that in order to have a manuscript accepted for publication, there needs to be at least one external review. Of course, while we vastly prefer two, because then you get a diversity of perspectives, if you feel that the manuscript has been thoroughly evaluated, you can add your own review to that and issue a decision to move forward.
Yeah, but the system won't like allow, the AE to like, take a decision when you have just one completed review. So how do we do that?
There is a way in the submission system, and I can follow up with you directly, or maybe I'll add it in kind of the Q&A as part of the follow-up. You can change the number of required reviews to one, and that will let you progress. It's just a quirk of the system that prevents you from moving forward, but you can change that.
Okay, all right, thank you, appreciate it.
All right, just in interest of time, if you do have any questions that haven't yet been answered, please do add them to the chat. As I mentioned before, Zoom will capture the chat and we will make sure to follow up with those questions afterwards. But I'd like to conclude the presentation portion of this now. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording at this time, and we will move on to the social time.